Earlier this year, I read The Magus by John Fowles. It's the kind of book that I normally love, told in the first person, and drops you into the head of an individual who's not necessarily likable, can be particularly difficult at times, and maybe isn't the kind of person that you would want to be friends with, but usually that makes for interesting reading at the very least. And I found myself really struggling to make my way through this book, despite it having so many of the elements that I normally enjoy. Thinking of My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh, which has just the most reprehensible main character you could imagine. Maybe not the most, but certainly she's up there. She's not a great person by any means, and being in her head just exposes her as even more of a terrible person. But I found that book so propulsive and I loved reading it. I think I finished it in like a day. It was just so fascinating. And yet with The Magus, I found myself really struggling to finish it. And yet I did finish it. I knew about 25% of the way in how I felt about this book on the whole. I actually don't regret doing that. I think maybe in the past I've said that, but I came across a quote recently by Ada Palmer, who is a science fiction author who I haven't read myself, but I was reading this quote and it really changed my mind about the way that I'm going to be approaching DNFs in the future. This also has to do with my Narnia read-along with Andy Smith, where we are reading through Narnia, and it's been really interesting to return to the series as an adult because I just disagree with C.S. Lewis's morality, and yet there is a layer over that I find really interesting, and why, even though I don't like what C.S. Lewis is always saying, and I don't necessarily agree with him, strongly disagree with the ultimate message of this book, I found it to be cynical and pessimistic, ambiguous in a way that I don't agree with personally, and yet I found there to be something there in reading it. And this quote that I mentioned, but I have not told you yet what it is, by Ada Palmer, I think really points to why that is. So this is probably obvious to anyone who has an English degree or a philosophy degree, but as someone who does not have those things and who just went to school for engineering and graduated pretty much without ever taking an English class, in college at least, I found this quote to be really interesting in the context of me not DNFing The Magus. And I sort of pointed to the impulse behind that, behind me wanting to push through and finish this book, because even though I found myself disagreeing with Fowles' worldview, I still found it really interesting to think of it in terms of what that time period was like. Like, you know, this is a very postmodern book. I mean, I don't know a ton about postmodernism, but I was just thinking, like, this is in the years directly following World War II. This is the kind of book that would have been written in that time. This is the sort of worldview that that author would have. It also helps that I read this book because so many people recommended it as a Bildungsroman. I guess what I'm trying to say is that DNFing books isn't just, at least for me, isn't just about whether or not I'm enjoying it. There is something to be said about a book's historical context or its place in terms of in the literary canon, where it's sometimes it is worth it to push through and finish a book. A heuristic I would follow when deciding whether or not to DNF a book is this book significant? Like, is it going to add to your understanding of a certain genre or subgenre? Is it, you know, the kind of book that you should read because you are interested in the particulars of something, if that makes sense? I just want to add to this conversation around DNFs that sometimes it is worth it to push through and finish a book. Yes, life is short and have only so much time to read, but I don't regret making myself finish this book. I think it added to my understanding of the Bildungsroman. It added to my understanding of postmodern literature. You know, at the end of the day, it was competently written. An example of a book that I wish I had DNF'd is Lies and Weddings by Kevin Kwan, which I read earlier this year. I think I knew 25% of the way in that was not going to be worth my time, and yet I finished it. So yeah, there's definitely trade-offs with DNFing. I don't know, that was just on my mind today. And again, it's the sort of thing that I can talk about during Vlogmas, but I wouldn't necessarily take up anyone's time during the normal year. As a little update for you all, tomorrow's Vlogmas is not going to be a video. I'm going to do a live stream with my friend Andy about the aforementioned Narnia books. So we're going to be talking about Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So if you're interested, check that out. It'll be tomorrow evening. Let me know in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on DNFing, and have you ever pushed through a book where you felt like it was worth it? I guess I'm trying to find that sort of gray area where it's like, yeah, it was like hard to read and it was a challenge, or I didn't particularly like this one aspect of it, but I'm glad I finished it and I'm glad I made myself do the thing. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.